Welcome. So in this video, I'm going to be sharing a free training that I just did in my Rise Unlimited program. This is a 12-week coaching program where I work with you directly to help you resolve things like depersonalization, realization, anxiety, panic attacks, emotional numbness, existential fear and obsession, health anxiety, and really anything related to fight, flight, freeze response. If you are interested in applying for my Rise Unlimited program, there is a link below. There's a free training that I've done called the 5 Shifts to Heal from Trauma, Anxiety, Panic, and DPDR. You watch that training, and then at the end, it'll tell you the qualifications to apply. Feel free to apply to that, and we will take a look at your application and see what we can do. But anyway, I hope that you enjoy this training. As soon as I got done with it, I thought this is something I've got to put on YouTube to encourage people and really just give you some hope, because I know you're very scared right now if you're watching this video, and I understand what that feels like, because there was a time where I was suffering with very severe symptoms and I was watching every single YouTube video that you could imagine, and pretty much nobody really seemed to really have found the true root of the symptoms, and everybody had a different opinion, and it was a mess. And I've spent the last 5 years doing everything that I can to really make sure that I'm presenting not my opinion, but really what the latest neuroscience and traumatology is showing. And in this video, we do talk a lot about neuroscience in this training, and I hope that this will really encourage you and give you a sense of hope. Without further ado, I'll go ahead and splice the training after this. Make sure to click like if this helps you. Make sure to comment if this helps you. Share this with somebody if it helps you as well. Click subscribe, join the Trauma Free family, and I hope you have an awesome day. Enjoy the training. All right. Technically speaking, you guys already know what traumagenesis is. You've probably never heard it called that before, but if you've taken the training, then, or if you've taken the S5 method rather, then you already know what it is. But I'm going to break it down a little bit for you and kind of show how it applies to different things that you're struggling with. Because once we really identify why you're struggling with things, then we automatically know what the solution is. So there's a company called Toyota, which I'm sure most of you have heard of in the US, and they have this thing called the 5 whys. And the 5 whys is essentially this understanding that you want to ask the right questions to determine the right problem before you try to get to the solution. And this is really the main reason why so many people don't find effective recovery methods, is because people are beginning, like the people who are teaching you these methods are beginning with the presupposition that the symptoms are the problem. Whenever we know that the symptoms of trauma and anxiety are biologically correct for the state that you're in, which is a state of survival, fight, flight, freeze response. Your symptoms are like exhaust smoke in a car. They're correct for the state that you're in. And if you want to deal with exhaust smoke in a car, what do? You shut off the engine, right? But most methods out there are symptom focused, and people really have not invested the time to figure out what the real problem is. And through understanding traumagenesis, we're going to really understand what the real problem is. And by the way, going back to the 5 whys, I actually learned this whenever I worked at a call center, and we were trying to identify, how can we save even just a few seconds per phone call that these, customer service representatives were taking, which I was a customer service representative. How could we make our systems more efficient and things like that? And so we would be like, okay, why are people taking too long on their phone calls? That's like the first why question. And then what's the answer to that? Okay, well, it's because the system is too slow that they use to take the phone calls. The computer system is too slow, or the computer program rather, which I think there was one called Pega at one point in time, and then one called Oracle or something. Okay, so now that we've identified that problem, let's ask another why question. Well, why is Pega slow, right? Well, let's say because it needs to be redesigned because it was pushed out too quickly and it wasn't really designed for efficiency, which is true. Okay, well, why hasn't there been another redesign of Pega or Oracle? Well, that's because it's not a priority on the development team's priority list. Okay, well, why is redoing Pega or Oracle not a priority on the development team's priority list? Okay, do you see how we use the 5 whys to identify what the real problem is before we even got to the solution? And here's what you'll find. Once you identify the actual problem, the solution becomes apparent. The solution becomes apparent, right? One second. But if you begin with a presupposition that the symptoms are the problem, you're going to be spending all your time trying to get rid of something that actually isn't a problem at all, right? And so traumagenesis is us understanding what the actual problem is. And I'm telling you, once you see what the actual problem is, the solution becomes 100% apparent, all right? So let's go ahead and get into it. What is traumagenesis? Traumagenesis is the original formation of sensory triggers that will ultimately lead to a trauma state in the future. And the equation for this is painful experiences plus learning equals the formation of a sensory trigger. You guys have heard me talk about this a lot. You have an emotionally distressing experience or a physically painful experience. And the brain, through neuroplasticity, encodes the sensory data that you're experiencing in that moment as being associated with physical danger, right? Regardless of whether it was just an emotionally distressing experience or a physically painful experience, the brain forms a sensory trigger, meaning the brain conditions to associate what you're seeing, hearing, tasting, touching, smelling, feeling in that moment with physical danger. Why is this? Well, it's because the brain registers emotional distress and physical pain as the same thing. I mean, how many times have you guys heard me say that? You're probably about ready to just like, punch a wall if you hear me say that one more time. But I'm trying to lay foundation. It's important that you know that. It's the anterior cingulate cortex and the anterior insula. Those are the parts of the brain that are responsible for determining how the brain registers different experiences. And for whatever reason, which, maybe it was convenience from an evolutionary perspective to just have one circuit register two things. It's debated as to why this happens. But for whatever reason, the brain registers emotional distress as physical pain, as being physically dangerous. And so what ends up happening is you have all of these sensory triggers that start to form, and your brain assigns the procedure of fight, flight, freeze response to that sensory data. And what that means for you is whenever you see something that's similar to that painful past experience, or hear something, or smell something, or taste something, or feel something that is sensorially similar to that painful past learning experience, you're going to access the procedure of fight, flight, freeze response in the body. That's it. But you don't start off with trauma, which is a state of nervous system overwhelm. Most of the time, sometimes you can, but most of the time it's not like that. Most of the time it's complex trauma, which means that there was the formation of these sensory triggers that started to produce low levels of stress and fatigue in the body. And it built up over a very, 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 very long period of time. Now, I'm not saying that, of course, this can't manifest in childhood, as far as like you can, of course, reach a trauma state in childhood, especially if you have very dysregulated caregivers, especially if you're growing up in an abusive environment. You better believe that kids can experience DPDR and start to have memory issues, and time feels distorted and all kinds of trauma symptoms, right? But nonetheless, this is the Genesis, right? Like in the Bible, first book, Genesis, right? In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Well, this is like in the beginning, you had a painful experience, plus neuroplasticity led to the formation of a sensory trigger. And what's even more interesting is, as you guys know from the S5 method, you don't even become consciously aware of the procedure of fight or flight response in the body until fear kicks in. Fear is not an emotion. Fear is whenever you become consciously aware that your body is in fight or flight response and you have a sense of danger. So you can literally be walking around carrying tension and energy and unprocessed emotion from the procedure of fight or flight response for years before you're even consciously aware of it. And you would say, oh, I'm fine, right? Because you think, oh, well, I'm not having a panic attack and I'm not experiencing all these extreme symptoms. But yet there's a lot of buildup. And then people do things to numb the buildup, right? Food, porn, alcohol, nicotine, just to name a few. And then, of course, they check out mentally. They start to dissociate into the past, into the future. There's all kinds of ways that people are not interoceptive. They're not experiencing their embodied self. So that also delays fear kicking in because they're just so numb and dissociated from their interoceptive system. So anyway, what I'm saying is this is kind of the nuts and bolts of what happened. You started to have all these painful experiences, and through neuroplasticity, your brain formed all kinds of sensory triggers. And because you didn't know how to self-regulate and you didn't know how to be interoceptive because nobody taught you, it all built up. And then eventually, like water filling up in a cup, you reached a state of nervous system overwhelm. And maybe it was a marijuana experience that led to that. Maybe that was the straw that broke the camel's back, or the drop of water that caused the cup to overflow. Maybe it was a breakup. Maybe it was losing a job, or maybe it was something very small. But regardless, I'm telling you, for all of you, it was not that event that led to all these symptoms. It was that event, that escalating event, coupled with traumagenesis, all of these sensory triggers that got formed that created the procedure of fight or flight response in the body that wasn't being released for a very long period of time. And then everything escalated. You were a pressure cooker. That's like whenever I'm talking to people who want to sign up for the program, one of the things that I'll do is I'll be like, yeah, I mean, you look at your history, it makes perfect sense why you ended up in this state. I very rarely talk to somebody that has a literal perfect life with no stress whatsoever, and then they just suddenly go into constant trauma symptoms. It does happen every now and then, but it's very rare. And most of the time, I think those people, they don't understand how much that there was a buildup in their body. They just weren't consciously aware of it. So they thought that everything was perfect, but it really wasn't. So anyway, this is the basic foundational understanding of how you began the journey of trauma long before trauma was there. Trauma is a state of nervous system overwhelm. And I'm telling you, we understand complex trauma is where it's this oftentimes slow buildup of stress and adversity over a very long period of time. So this doesn't apply to everybody, but it probably applies to a lot of you. Traumagenesis especially begins in early childhood development. So I'm going to read this, especially between the ages of 0 and 2 and 5 and 6. The neurological template, which refers to the brain's framework for interpreting and understanding the world, begins to develop from birth and is significantly formed by the age of 2. Wow. Whenever I first came across that information, I was shocked. Between the ages of 0 and 2, our neurological template, which is the framework by which we interpret the world, is mostly formed. By the age of 2, that's just baffling to me. And then it kind of finishes off between the ages of 5 and 6. And I mean, technically, we're always learning. Our brain is always learning and things like that. But as far as the template, the framework by which we're going to interpret experiences, the framework, the template is pretty much laid by the age of 6. I mean, it's just crazy to me. And let me keep reading. During this critical period of early childhood, this is talking about between the ages of 0 and 2, a child's brain is rapidly growing and adapting in response to their experiences and environment. The first 2 years of life are marked by rapid development in various areas, such as motor skills, language acquisition, cognitive abilities, and social emotional functioning. During this time, the brain is highly malleable, and malleable means, just plastic. It's very moldable. We're not, think that, and responsive to environmental stimuli, which allows it to create neural connections and pathways that shape how the child perceives and interacts with the world. So the first thing that we want to talk about. So several factors contribute to the formation of the neurological template during these early years. The first is sensory stimulation. The five senses, sight, hearing, touch, taste, and smell, provide essential input for the developing brain. Exposure to a variety of sensory experiences helps create neural connections that support perception and cognition. But let me pause there for a second. What if your sensory stimulation is very, very, very stressful, right? A child is completely codependent on their caregiver for their ability to regulate their nervous system. They're codependent on co-regulation. And so if you grow up with a dysregulated caregiver, whether it's your parents or grandparents or uncle and aunt or just whoever, maybe even at daycare or whatever, like that's going to have a drastic effect on the amount of sensory triggers that you have. And if you grew up in a very hostile environment, or a nervous system war zone, an environment that's highly chaotic, highly punitive, highly aggressive, highly unstable, or highly unpredictable, you literally began life with a neurological template of threat as it relates to your sensory environments, and you were perceiving threat left and right. So anyway, but if you have lots of safe experiences related to sensory stimulation, well, then the template is going to be laid that, hey, what I'm seeing, hearing, touching, tasting, smelling is safe. Or maybe you experience things that are not safe, but it's still just a small experience. Your overall experience is that you're having a bunch of safe experiences with occasional, dangerous experiences, right? The next, attachment and bonding. So secure attachment to caregivers is crucial for healthy emotional and social development. The quality of the caregiver-child relationship influences the neurological template by shaping the child's understanding of trust, safety, and relationships between the ages of 0 and 2, and of course extends to 5 and 6, all the way up until 6 years old. Your brain is asking the question, are adults safe? Right? Are people safe? Are other kids safe? And if you have nothing but painful experiences, well, then you're going to have distrust. You're not going to feel safe. You're going to perceive threat, and you're not going to want to connect with people. There's a few kids from our church. Sadly, they lost their father, and the mother still goes to the church, and he died in a car accident, and it was very sudden. And this is a very young couple too. And one of the girls basically just doesn't connect with people anymore. She's got maybe one or two, especially men, she just doesn't really connect with people anymore. And that's because, think about it, she connected with her dad and then he died. Right. And so as a defense mechanism, she has formed a neural connection of threat association with relationships in general, but especially with men. And I'll talk to her and you could tell she was just very distant, and she did start to open up, which I'm very thankful for. But this girl's like 7 or 8, whatever. So anyway, I'm just trying to tell you that between the ages of 0 and 6, if you did not have the proper level of secure attachment relationships, then you already began your life with a lot of sensory triggers and relationship triggers. The next, language development, but I won't read the text on that. But social interactions. Social experiences help shape a child's understanding of themselves and others. Through interaction with caregivers, siblings, and peers, the child develops social skills and learns about their emotions, empathy, and cooperation. This is how narcissism is formed, right? Like narcissistic personality disorder is formed in childhood, and it's usually due to two factors. Either the parents make the child believe that they can do no wrong, so that, in other words, the parent or parents are very narcissistic themselves, and they just lavish the kid with compliments all the time and make them believe that they're superior and that they're better than other kids and better than everybody. Or it's opposite. The parents neglect the child, and because the child doesn't feel doesn't feel a healthy sense of self, they take on this narcissistic superior persona as a way to dissociate from the pain of feeling not good enough and feeling low and empty because they didn't have their parents develop them as far as their sense of self. But, this is the age where kids learn about, emotional regulation and empathy and cooperation. I'm telling you, like, childhood is so very, very important. And if you had dysregulated caregivers or even dysregulated siblings, or maybe you were like me and you were bullied at school and your caregivers were dysregulated or absent and your siblings bullied you or weren't around, well, then you began life with a neurological template of threat association. And I'm telling you, that was fundamental for what led to you experiencing a state of trauma later on. Lastly, environmental factors. The child's environment, including nutrition, sleep, and exposure to stress, can impact the brain's development and the formation of the neurological template. Were you taught any stress mitigation techniques by your parents or your teachers or anything like that? What about diet? I'll tell you what, I don't know about you guys, but I grew up on ramen noodles and ravioli and microwaved hot dogs. And I grew up in a house where we had rats everywhere. And I remember one time I woke up, it's kind of nasty, but there was a rat in my armpit. I was laying on the floor and I felt something in my armpit and I woke up and a mouse ran out. Like, that's the house that I grew up in. And there was not structure. There wasn't like, hey, we need to make sure we're going to bed at this time. Hey, we need to wake up at this time. Hey, make sure you prioritize sleep. Hey, make sure that you eat healthy. Hey, here's how you deal with stress. I didn't have any of that, guys. And again, some of you may be listening to this now or in the future, and you may be thinking, hey, I had a perfect childhood. Well, again, you can have a great childhood, and then during adulthood, you can start to form sensory triggers, of course, and it can lead to a trauma state. Or you could have single event trauma, right? You can have complex or single event trauma. But I'm telling you, most of the people that come to me and they're constantly experiencing symptoms of depersonalization, realization, and panic or emotional numbness, and time feels distorted and their memory is thrown off and they're completely avoiding sensory triggers interoceptively or physically. Like I can almost promise you that probably didn't just happen in a moment. There probably was a long history of painful experiences, traumagenesis, that led to this moment. All right. So anyway, let's talk about traumagenesis with symptoms, right? Because once you enter into fight, flight, freeze response, neuroplasticity doesn't shut off. Your brain is still observing, and your brain just doesn't really understand the way that we understand. Like, you can have the knowledge that your symptoms are safe, but if you respond to something that's safe as if it's dangerous, your brain is still going to form a trigger, right? So how traumagenesis begins with the symptoms of trauma or anxiety is you have a painful experience, which in this case, it would be emotionally distressing experiences, while experiencing fight, flight, freeze symptoms, and your brain through neuroplasticity thinks, oh, well, these symptoms must be dangerous. And your brain attaches the procedure of fight, flight, freeze response to fight, flight, freeze symptoms. So now safe symptoms get associated with danger, right? So to give you an example that all of us are going to be very familiar with, it's a big reason why you're here, is let's talk about the symptoms of depersonalization realization, right? Which are some of many trauma symptoms, right? A lot of people associate me as like the DPDR guy, but it's like, I'm going to help you get out of fight, flight, or freeze response, right? And there's tons of symptoms that are associated with each one of those states. DPDR are just some of many trauma symptoms. Trauma is a state of nervous system overwhelm. What happens when you experience depersonalization realization? Well, the symptoms are extremely scary and terrifying, and you've never experienced it before. And that alone makes you have extreme emotional distress and obsession with the symptoms, which starts to sensitize the symptoms, meaning because you're tensing up your body and you're sitting and you're obsessing over them and you don't really know what they are and they're so scary, your brain is literally creating neural connections of threat association with the symptoms of trauma. That's what happened to me. I was pacing back and forth after the bad marijuana experience, and all of a sudden I felt out of body. Everything felt like I was watching a movie, and I didn't know what it was. And so I started to tense up even more. I started to obsess and resist. And then my brain formed an association with these symptoms of threat, which further elongated the state of nervous system overwhelm. So another thing is the symptoms feel permanent. Whenever you're in a trauma state, the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex begins to shut down. That's the timekeeper of the brain. And so your ability to see beginning, middle, and end of anything starts to be compromised. And so you can't see an end to your suffering. It feels permanent. The symptoms feel permanent. And if you're experiencing terrifying symptoms that feel permanent, that's going to create a lot of emotional distress. So again, painful experiences while experiencing fight, flight, freeze symptoms plus learning equal the safe symptoms get associated with danger. And the brain attaches the procedure of fight, flight, freeze response to the symptoms of fight, flight, freeze response. Your brain is thinking, oh, we got to get away from these symptoms. They're dangerous. They're a lion trying to eat you. This is literally what your brain is thinking. You can't see this from your perspective. You have to see this from your brain's perspective. The brain is kind of dumb sometimes. But then it goes even deeper. We read Reddit comments and blogs saying that the symptoms are permanent, right? You see somebody struggling for 30, 40, 50 plus years. And you're like, oh gosh, what if that's me? Your brain goes into catastrophic risk assessment. And your brain says, well, what if that ends up being me? What if I'm that person 40 years from now that's still on the internet trying to figure out how to overcome this? And you start to visualize that. And visualizing is sensory data. That movie that you play in your head is very important. That's why you got to be careful the question that you're asking yourself, because the question creates a movie. If you're sitting around asking a negative what if question all day, that comes with a movie, and your brain thinks that that movie is real. That's why you can watch a scary movie and it traumatizes you, right? A scary movie. It's Hollywood, it's actors, but yet your nervous system doesn't know that. It just sees it as sensory data that you're having a very painful emotional experience with while you're watching it, right? And so anyway, all that I'm trying to tell you is there's layers to this. You see comments on YouTube and you read blogs and you see Reddit comments of people who haven't overcame this. In fact, to this day, I'm pretty sure that if you type in on Google depersonalization cure, or is there a depersonalization cure, one of the first blogs that Google populates, it says there is no known cure. But then it goes even deeper. You go to your doctor, and the doctor most of the time is not going to know anything about these symptoms. Sometimes they do, but most of the time they don't. And I've done polls on this. And you go to your therapist, and sometimes your therapist looks at you and you can just tell they have no idea what these symptoms are. Maybe they're the best therapists in the world, but if they've never even heard of what you're going through, it appears to further convey this lie that you're never going to get out of this. If my therapist doesn't even know what the symptoms are, or my doctor doesn't even know what the symptoms are, how am I supposed to get out of this? And I have people tell me all the time, their doctor or their therapist will have to look up what the symptoms of depersonalization realization are. That doesn't really instill confidence in people. So what other conclusion could there be than the symptoms are permanent? That's what your brain thinks. It's not true, but that's what your brain thinks. But it's not just with DPDR, it's with memory. Your memory feels messed up. You can't remember your past. And you forget things easily. Time feels distorted. Sometimes time goes by really fast or it goes by really slow. right? Sometimes your heart is pounding out of your chest and you start resisting that. So you create what's called a somatic trigger. Your painful experience happens while you're experiencing physical sensations, and that causes safe symptoms to be associated with danger. Your heartbeat feels like it's going to stop, and it creates a lot of emotional distress. And so your brain starts to condition to associate your heartbeat with danger. This happened to me. I had an extreme heartbeat phobia for years and years and years. I couldn't take a blood pressure monitor, or I couldn't check my blood pressure. I would constantly feel my heartbeat, and I'd feel one beat and then pull my fingers away from my neck because I hated the space between beats because it made me feel like my heart was stopping. I tossed and turned at night. I would just hated the feeling of my heartbeat. And then visual disturbances. This is very common. You know, people have light sensitivity or sensory overload, or let's say visual overload, or blurred vision or double vision, or eye floaters. They have all these visual disturbances, and it makes you feel like you're going nuts. You're like, why are all these little floaters dancing around? Why are there static dots popping up in my vision? And you resist, and you're obsessing, and you Google, and you're tensing up your body. And all of a sudden, painful experiences while experiencing fight, flight, freeze symptoms plus learning equals safe symptoms get associated with danger. I always tell people healing from trauma is like peeling an onion. There are many layers to this, and this right here is one of the main layers. Is you have had so much resistance towards these safe symptoms in times past because you weren't properly educated, and that's not your fault, and you didn't know how to self-regulate, and because of that, your brain conditioned to associate these safe symptoms with danger. Your brain attached the procedure of fight, flight, freeze response to the symptoms of fight, flight, freeze response, which means that that's one additional layer that is keeping your nervous system from downregulating. This is why education is so important. A lot of everybody, I'm telling you, every single person that comes to me, that's all about the techniques. Teach me the techniques. Listen, we've got a lot of techniques. But actually, education is one of the most important parts of recovery, because you need to know how all this happened. You need to know what formed these sensory triggers, these somatic triggers, and these symptom triggers. It's very, very important, because this will communicate to us how we're going to get out of this. And here's what you need to know, whether it's traumagenesis with symptoms or a somatic trigger or a sensory trigger, whenever you have repeated painful experiences plus continual learning, which is neuroplasticity, eventually your brain forms not just neural connections of threat association, but neural highways of association. Look at this road right here, or not road. Look at these roads, these highways. What is a neural highway? A neural highway is a very strong set of neural connections as it relates to something. And in this case, especially with symptoms, you've resisted and you've obsessed and you've avoided. And every time that you did that, the brain is just strengthening the neural connections until eventually it's not just a neural connection. It is a literal neural highway, which means it's a very strong neural connection, very fast acting neural set of neural connections of threat association with these safe symptoms. And the stronger that the connections get, the faster that they fire. So we're almost finished. How do we get out of this? Right? Remember, we talked about at the beginning. Once we understand how we got here, well, now we understand what the solution is, right? Let's go back. It's repeated painful experiences plus learning that created neural highways of threat association. So painful experiences equal a threat association. Well, what's the opposite of that? Repeated safe experiences plus learning will equal neural highways of safety association. This is the foundation of every single thing that I teach. And this is based on neuroscience. This is what we're learning in the field of neuroscience, is we need people to know that they're safe. This is the gateway to trauma healing. And honestly, the main way that people feel safe is through other people. And this is why this endless search for this magical method that's going to cure people's trauma is going to be an endless pursuit, because humans heal humans. Nothing makes people feel safe than other people. That is just how we are wired. In fact, if your brain perceives threat, the very first thing that you look to downregulate your nervous system is social connection. Like if you're sitting in a restaurant and somebody walks in and they're really sketchy, the first thing that you're going to do subconsciously is look around at other people and see how they're reacting. And if other people are kind of returning, back to their meal and it's no big deal, that's probably what you're going to do. But if you look around at other people and their facial expression is shocked, and they're not eating their food and they're looking at this gentleman, you will do the same thing. You could call this the herd mentality, right? We look to other people to determine safety or threat as the frontline defense. It's just how our brains are wired. And it's really about 66% of recovery is working with somebody that makes you feel safe, in particular, as it relates to two things: positive expectancy, which is another way of saying hope, this person's ability to create hope in you. And then also therapeutic relationship, which is another way of saying a healing connection. Why have I been able to be so successful with helping people? People that have literally spent sometimes hundreds of thousands of dollars on medical stuff and mental health stuff trying to fix this. People that have tried every program that you can imagine. People that have spent years and years and years trying to figure this out, and they just weren't able to do it until they found me. Well, it's not because I'm special. It's because I understand the power of co-regulation, number one, and I intentionally create hope in people. I intentionally build connection with people because I love people. I share my story. And the second part of this is self-regulation. That also creates safety. It creates a sense of safety in the nervous system. When you get in tune with your body, when you build interoception, which is the experience of the embodied self, and you begin to release the buildup of tension, energy, and emotion in the body, and you also begin to change your lifestyle and make the appropriate lifestyle adjustments to make sure that your nervous system is perceiving safety, which looks like either leaving nervous system war zones, or maybe you need to, prioritize sleep more and diet and relaxation and rest and different things, whatever that looks like for you. Maybe you need to disconnect from certain people. Maybe you need to change jobs, whatever that looks like. When you start to self-regulate and you flood your body with relaxation and rest and health, paired with benefiting from the sense of safety that comes through co-regulation, somebody creating hope in you, and also somebody building connection with you, all of a sudden the neural pathways start to rapidly change. And if you continue benefiting from co-regulation and self-regulation long enough, you will eventually get back into your social engagement system, which is the ventral vagal branch of the parasympathetic nervous system. That's the part of your nervous system that comes online whenever your brain is perceiving safety, which is called neuroception, your brain's ability to perceive safety. Whenever neuroception comes back online, all of a sudden, fight, flight, freeze symptoms go away. Right? Fight, flight, freeze symptoms are part of a threat response. It is your body and nervous system preparing for threat. So what is the opposite of threat? Safety. The opposite of threat is safety, right? And the more that we convey safety to the nervous system via the body, through self-regulation and co-regulation, the more that the brain through neuroplasticity will desensitize sensory triggers, symptom triggers, and somatic triggers. And the more that the person will be in their social engagement system. And once you are back in your social engagement system, which will start with glimmers, it'll start with just, little small moments, you're going to start to feel normal again. You're going to be able to concentrate. You're going to be able to remember normally. You're going to feel safe in your body, safe in your environment. You're going to feel adventurous again. You're going to be able to focus on your life again. You're going to have the same emotional connection to the activities that you love, the people that you love again. All these things will begin to happen. I have seen this happen so many times at this point with situations that appear to be impossible that I just believe this. I'm teaching this. Yeah, of course, the field of neuroscience and traumatology is teaching this, but guys, I've seen it time and time and time again. That's why whenever I tell you, you can beat this, it's not me just like, it's not like positive affirmations or positive self-talk or whatever. I actually believe you can beat this. And that's why I harp so much on making sure that you are creating the conditions of safety that will lead to your nervous system being able to downregulate. That's why I say make sure you're doing the S5 method. Those are the 5 things that are going to flood your body with safety as it relates to self-regulation. And also, that's why I emphasize, make sure you're reaching out to me in this program. Make sure that you're taking advantage of having access to co-regulation, because I can't give you co-regulation if you don't draw upon it, right? And most of you are doing a great job of that, by the way, right? So I just want to commend you guys. I know it's hard to reach out to somebody. Maybe you feel like you're bothering me. You're never bothering me. I'm here for you. I'm here to help you. Just remember that. But I call it opposite response rewiring because we're doing things that are opposite than threat over and over and over again until the brain believes that we're safe and neuroception kicks back on. And you're back in your social engagement system. Healing trauma is all about conveying safety to the body or to the nervous system via the body. All right? Trauma is a body that is constantly preparing for a threat that never comes because of these painful past experiences that formed all kinds of sensory and even somatic and even symptom triggers, right? That's what trauma is. Trauma is not a past event. It is a present perception of threat where there is no threat and your body preparing to address that threat. That's the real problem. So you're experiencing the right symptoms in the right state, just at the wrong time. You are in a threat response when there is no threat. Remember the 5 whys, going back to the Toyota, method, right? Why are these symptoms happening? It's because you're in the right state and experiencing the right symptoms at the wrong time. And that's because you've had repeated painful experiences that have formed all kinds of sensory, somatic, and symptom triggers over a long period of time that has made your nervous system believe that you are in danger, right? You're not in danger. At least most of you are not. Maybe some people are under physical abuse or something. And that's why I always tell those people, I can't work with you until you leave that. But 99% of you, there is no physical danger, but yet your body is constantly preparing as if there is. So how do we get out of that? How do we get you out of this? We do things that are opposite of threat. And what is opposite of threat? Safety. How do we convey safety to the nervous system? Well, we self-regulate, which is releasing the buildup of tension, energy, and emotion in the body. And also you adjust your lifestyle appropriately. Get away from things that are conveying threat, obsessive research, obsessively talking about the symptoms, right? We look at your diet, we look at your sleep, we look at your relationships, we look at, are you overworking yourself at work? Are you overextending yourself? Some people, they're a people pleaser. We got to address that. You can't be a people pleaser anymore. You don't have enough energy for that, right? We take a look at all these factors. Also, your body. Are you in tune with your body? Do you have interoception? Are you releasing the tension, energy, and emotion in the body? And then lastly, co-regulation. And it doesn't have to be me. It is in this case, in this mentorship, but somebody creates a sense of hope in you that you can do this. You've overcome everything life has ever thrown at you. This is going to be no different. And they continually help you up during those low moments. And they build that relationship with you. They build a safe relationship with you. If you continue to do these things, it is not a matter of if you're going to get out of this. It is a matter of when. I've seen it. The neuroscience shows it. And you can do this. Okay.